The monitor beside my bed would not stop beeping. That was the first thing I was aware of, not the faces around me, not the voices, not even the pain in my chest that felt like someone had placed a flat stone over my ribs and slowly pressed down. Just that sound. Steady, relentless, almost patient. I had been at St. Andrew's Presbyterian on a Thursday morning. It was the first Thursday of November, which meant the women's fellowship group was meeting before the main service, 12 of us, around a folding table with terrible coffee and good company. I remember Margaret Ellison was telling a story about her granddaughter's hockey tournament up in Barrie, and I remember laughing. Then I remember the floor. I do not remember anything else for 3 days. When I finally opened my eyes in the ICU at Hamilton General, the face looking back at me was not my son's. It was my neighbor's daughter, Teresa, 26 years old, studying nursing at McMaster, who lived 2 houses down from me on Chidokee Avenue and used to knock on my door every October to borrow my good roasting pan for Thanksgiving. She was sitting in the plastic chair beside my bed with a paper cup of Tim Hortons in her hands, and when she saw me open my eyes, she set it down on the floor and reached for my hand. "Mrs. Callahan," she said, "welcome back." I looked around the room. The door was closed. The window showed gray sky over the escarpment, the kind of sky Hamilton does in November, low and heavy, like it has something it wants to say but cannot find the words. I looked back at Teresa. "Where is my son?" I asked. She did not answer right away. She pressed my hand a little tighter instead, and I understood from that small hesitation everything I needed to know, even before the nurse came in, even before the doctor sat beside my bed and explained what had happened to me. I understood it the way you understand something when your body already knows the answer but your mind has not yet been willing to accept it. My son had not come. Let me tell you about my son. His name is Brandon, and he is 43 years old, and I have loved him with the kind of love that reshapes you from the inside, the way a river reshapes rocks slowly, completely, without asking permission. He grew up in our house on Chidokee Avenue after his father and I moved there from Sudbury in 1989. He played rep hockey until he was 16. He was not a perfect student, but he was a curious one, always taking things apart to see how they worked, and for a while I thought he might become an engineer. He became a sales manager instead. He lives now in Mississauga with his girlfriend, a woman named Kylie, whom I have met 4 times in 3 years, and he works for a company that sells commercial flooring to office buildings. He earns a good living. He drives a Dodge Ram pickup that costs more than my first house. He calls me on my birthday. He calls me at Christmas. Sometimes, if a Toronto Maple Leafs game goes badly enough to irritate him, he calls me to complain about the goaltending because he knows I will listen. Those are the calls I cherish most, truthfully not because of what he says, but because of what they mean. They mean he still thinks of me as someone to call. After his father died 4 years ago, I thought we might grow closer. Grief does that. Sometimes it pulls people toward each other, strips away the ordinary excuses we use to stay at a comfortable distance. And for a few months, it did seem that way. Brandon came to the house every Sunday for dinner. He helped me go through his father's things. He sat with me at the kitchen table, and we talked about memories I had not spoken aloud in years. But slowly, the Sundays stopped. The dinners stopped. The distance returned. I told myself it was simply life, a busy man, a demanding job, a long commute on the 401. I told myself this the way you tell yourself a small, comfortable lie, because the truth underneath it was something I was not prepared to look at directly. The truth was that Brandon found me inconvenient. Not cruel, he was never cruel. But I had become something he managed rather than something he loved. A box to check, a call to make, an obligation he fulfilled in the minimum necessary way. I did not say this to anyone. I am 68 years old, and I was raised in a family where you do not say such things, where you fold them neatly and put them somewhere quiet and carry on. My mother was the same way. Her mother before her. I carried on. The doctor's name was Dr. Patel. He explained that I had experienced a significant cardiac event, a heart attack, to use the plain words that had happened suddenly and without warning during the fellowship meeting. One of the women, a retired nurse named Helen, had recognized what was happening and called 911 before I had even fully lost consciousness. She had performed compressions until the paramedics arrived. Helen had saved my life. "Doctor," Patel told me that the hospital had attempted to contact my son beginning within 30 minutes of my arrival. They had called his mobile number. They had called the work number I had listed on my medical forms. They had called the house in Mississauga. He paused here, and he had the careful, practiced look of a man who delivers difficult information regularly and has learned not to let his own feelings enter the room. They had attempted to reach Brandon 29 times over the first 18 hours. 29 calls. I lay there and I counted that number silently in my head. 29. Not once. Not twice. 29 times a hospital telephone had rung on the other end of a line connected to my son, and 29 times there had been no answer. His voicemail was full by the second day, Dr. Patel said. I said nothing. I looked at the ceiling. There is a particular kind of pain that has nothing to do with the body, that no medication can touch, that simply settles into you and waits. I know that pain very well. I knew it in that moment better than I had ever known it before. Teresa was still in the chair beside me. She had been there, I would later learn, for most of the 3 days. Her mother had come too, spelling her off in shifts, bringing soup from their kitchen at home because Teresa had told her I did not like hospital food. This woman who had borrowed my roasting pan for Thanksgiving had sat at my bedside for 72 hours, while my own son had not answered his phone. I reached over and held Teresa's hand this time. She let me. On the second day after I woke up, Teresa brought me my phone. She had retrieved it from my purse, which the paramedics had brought in with me, and she had charged it overnight. I turned it on. There were 41 notifications. Most were from the women in the fellowship group, text messages and emails asking after me, sending prayers, letting me know that Helen had been to the church to ask for special intentions at the Wednesday service. There were messages from my neighbor on the other side, from a woman I used to work with at the school board, from my cousin in New Brunswick. I scrolled through all of them. I noted every name. Then I opened Brandon's contact and I looked at it for a long time. No calls, no texts. Nothing. I put the phone face down on the blanket and I stared at the escarpment through the window. The sky had not changed. Still gray, still heavy. I thought about something my husband used to say. He was a quiet man. My husband, a man who chose his words carefully, the way a careful person chooses their footing on uncertain ground. He used to say that you learn more about someone in a crisis than in a lifetime of ordinary days. Not because people are at their worst, he said, but because they stop performing. They show you what they actually choose when choosing costs something. I thought about what Brandon had chosen. He had chosen not to know. On the third day, I finally heard from him. Not a phone call, a text message. It came at 11:47 inches the morning, and I remember the time precisely because I had just been helped to sit up for the first time, and I was looking at the door of the room, hoping for the physiotherapist, when the phone buzzed. Hey, Mom. Just heard you had some kind of health thing. Hope you're doing okay. Let me know when you're up for a chat. Some kind of health thing. I sat with that message for a long time. I read it 4 or 5 times, turning it over, examining it the way you examine something to make sure you have understood it correctly before you allow yourself to react. Some kind of health thing. He had been called 29 times. His voicemail had been full, and the message he sent me 3 days later described my cardiac arrest as some kind of health thing. I did not reply. I thought about replying. I composed several versions in my head, some of them measured, some of them not. I thought about telling him how many times the hospital had called. I thought about asking him where he had been. I thought about describing what it had felt like to open my eyes in the ICU and find no one there who loved me. I did not send any of those messages. I set the phone face down again and I asked Teresa, when she arrived that afternoon, if she would mind reading to me from the book she had brought the day before. She had been reading me a Margaret Atwood novel one I had somehow never gotten to, which embarrassed me, given that I had been an English teacher for 27 years. She opened it to the page where we had stopped, and she began to read, and I closed my eyes and listened. And I did not think about Brandon's text message again that day. But I did not forget it. I was in the hospital for 11 more days after I woke. Dr. Patel was cautious, a word I appreciate in a cardiologist, and he wanted to be certain before he sent me home. There were adjustments to make, medications to begin, a referral to a cardiac rehabilitation program at the Juravinsky that I was told I should take seriously. During those 11 days, Brandon called me twice. The first call lasted 6 minutes. He asked how I was feeling, whether I needed anything, whether the doctors thought I would be back to normal quickly. He told me he was sorry he had not been able to get there sooner, some complications at work, he said, and a weekend he and Kylie had planned in Collingwood that had already been booked and paid for. He said this in the tone of a man explaining a scheduling conflict, not a man explaining why he had been unreachable while his mother was unconscious in intensive care. I said very little. I said I was resting. I said the doctors were pleased with my progress. He said, "Good, good." The second call lasted 4 minutes and was largely about the parking situation at Hamilton General, which he had apparently looked up online and found discouraging. He did not come to the hospital. Teresa drove me home when I was discharged. Her mother had been to my house beforehand, had stocked the refrigerator, changed the sheets, set the thermostat to 18 because she remembered I keep it cooler than most people. There was a casserole in the oven on low. There were flowers from the fellowship group on the kitchen table. I sat in my kitchen on Chodoki Avenue, and I looked at those flowers and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Something quieter than anger. Something with more weight to it. I had lived in that house for 35 years. My husband and I had painted every room together at least twice. My son had grown up in the bedroom at the end of the upstairs hall, the one with the window that looks out over the backyard maple tree. I had kept that house through 4 Ontario winters after my husband died. I had shoveled that driveway alone, patched that roof alone, replaced the water heater alone, gone through every bill and every form and every difficult bureaucratic conversation that comes with managing a house by yourself when you are 65 and recently widowed and still teaching 2 classes because the pension is better if you stay until 66. I had done all of it without asking Brandon for very much. I was careful about that. I had watched other women my age become burdens to their children, and I had promised myself I would not do that. I had my own savings. I had the house, which was worth considerably more than it had been in 1989. I had my teacher's pension, which is reliable if not extravagant. I had planned carefully for a long time. I sat at that kitchen table and I thought about all of it. The planning, the carefulness, the way I had arranged my life so that I would not be a weight on my son's shoulders. And I thought about 29 unanswered calls. And then I thought about Teresa, who had sat in a plastic chair beside my hospital bed for 3 days reading me Margaret Atwood. I called my lawyer in December. Her name is Patricia, and she has handled my family's legal matters for 12 years. I told her I wanted to review my will. She did not ask why. Patricia has been practicing long enough to know when not to ask why. I had drafted my will 5 years ago, after my husband passed. At the time, the arrangement had seemed straightforward. The house, my RRSPs, my savings, and my personal belongings were to go to Brandon upon my death, with a small bequest to St. Andrew's Presbyterian, and a piece of my mother's jewelry to my cousin in New Brunswick. I changed the will. I will not detail every change here, because some things are private, and because the specifics of what I chose to do with my assets are, ultimately, my own business. What I will say is this. I thought very carefully about the people who had been present when I needed them, and about the people who had not. I thought about what presence means, and about what absence costs. I thought about my husband's words about what people choose when choosing costs something. I made my decisions accordingly. Brandon does not know about the changes. I have not told him. I will not tell him, not because I want to punish him with silence, but because I have come to understand that I do not owe him that conversation. I spent many years arranging my life around his comfort, and I am 68 years old, and I have recently had a cardiac arrest, and I have decided that I would like to spend whatever years remain to me differently. In January, I started the cardiac rehabilitation program at the Juravinsky. 3 mornings a week, I go in and work with a physiotherapist and a small group of other patients who are also learning, as one of them put it on the first morning, to trust their own hearts again. There is a retired postal worker named Gord who is 71 and makes everyone laugh. There is a woman named Frances who drove school buses for 20 years and is stronger than anyone else in the room. There is a quiet man named Tom who always brings an extra coffee for whoever arrives after him. None of them know my story. I did not tell it to them, not the hospital part, not the Brandon part, not any of it. I simply showed up and worked alongside them, and accepted the coffee when Tom offered it, and discovered slowly that showing up and working alongside people and accepting what is offered is its own kind of healing. Teresa comes by on Sunday evenings now. We have dinner, nothing elaborate, usually soup and bread, sometimes a rotisserie chicken from the Fortinos on Garth Street. She tells me about her clinical placements, about the patients she worries about the parts of nursing school that nobody warns you about. I tell her about the rehabilitation program, about Gord and Francis and Tom, about the Margaret Atwood novel that I finished in February and loved. We do not talk about Brandon. There is nothing to say about Brandon that needs to be said. He came to see me once, in February. He drove down from Mississauga on a Saturday afternoon, and we had tea at the kitchen table, and he looked around the house the way people look at a place when they are trying to assess its value without appearing to do so. He asked how I was feeling. He asked whether the doctors had given me a timeline for being fully recovered. He asked carefully and casually whether I had been in touch with my lawyer recently. I told him I felt much better, thank you. I told him the doctors were satisfied with my progress. I told him I had indeed spoken with my lawyer and that my affairs were in order. He nodded. He drank his tea. He stayed for an hour and a half, and then he drove back to Mississauga, and I washed the cups and put them away, and I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard maple, which was still bare in February, its branches making their careful geometry against the sky. I felt nothing complicated. That surprised me. I had expected grief some residual mourning for the version of my son I had once believed him to be, for the Sunday dinners and the grown-up closeness I had imagined was still possible. But what I felt instead was simpler than grief. It was something closer to clarity. You spend a long time in life hoping that people will choose to rise to what you need from them. You give them opportunities. You make yourself easy to love. You arrange your expectations downward, carefully, so that they are achievable. And sometimes, despite all of that, a person shows you clearly, plainly, in the most unambiguous possible way, what they are actually willing to choose. My son had shown me. And what I had learned, lying in that ICU bed with a stranger's daughter holding my hand, was that the showing, as painful as it was also a kind of gift. Because you cannot make good decisions about your own life while you are still pretending about someone else's choices. You cannot plan clearly while you are hoping. I had stopped hoping, and in its place, something else had arrived, something firmer, something that felt, improbably, like relief. The maple tree in my backyard will bud again in April, as it does every year. I have watched it do this for 35 years. It has never once failed to come back. There is something I find quietly instructive in that, in the way a living thing can be stripped completely bare by the season and still, when the time comes, choose to begin again. I am not the same woman I was on the first Thursday of November. The doctors say my heart will always carry the evidence of what happened to it, that there is scar tissue now, that certain things will require more care than they once did. I am learning to think of this differently than I once would have, not as damage, as information, as the record of something survived. I have enrolled in a watercolor class on Tuesday afternoons at the Dundas Valley School of Art. I have never painted before in my life. I am not good at it. My instructor, a patient young man named Kieran, says that not being good at something is the only reliable starting point. I think he is right. I have also begun writing things down, not for anyone else. Just for myself, the way you do when you are trying to understand something that keeps changing shape when you look at it directly. I write at the kitchen table in the morning before the neighborhood wakes up, with the coffee that Teresa showed me how to make in the French press she gave me for Christmas, because she said I deserved better than the instant I had been drinking for 40 years. She was right about that too. There are people in this world who will show up for you without being asked, without being obligated, without calculating what it costs them. They will sit in plastic chairs for 3 days and read you Margaret Atwood and stock your refrigerator and change your sheets and bring their mother's casseroles. They will do this not because you have given them anything or because they expect anything in return, but because they are the kind of people who do not look away when someone needs them. I have spent a great deal of my life trying to be that kind of person. I have decided to spend the rest of it surrounding myself with others who are the same. The heart attack took something from me. It took a version of my future. I had imagined a version that still contained Sunday dinners and a grown son who called for reasons other than obligation. It took the comfortable story I had told myself about my family, but it gave me something too. It gave me 29 unanswered calls and a text message that said some kind of health thing, and both of those things, as painful as they were, told me something true, and it gave me Teresa in the chair beside me, and Helen doing compressions in the fellowship hall, and Francis and Gord and Tom and their extra coffees, and a watercolor class on Tuesday afternoons, where I am allowed to be a beginner. It gave me the permission, finally, to stop arranging myself around someone else's absence. My affairs are in order. My heart is healing. The maple tree will bud in April. I am 68 years old, and I am, for the first time in a long time, building the life I actually have rather than mourning the one I thought I would. That is enough. That is more than enough.